for the introduction, Joanne, and thank you to both you and James for hosting this impactful webinar. And to MP Sassy, thank you so much for your unwavering solidarity and for commemorating Genocide Prevention Day with us today. So I'm going to give a very brief overview to the Tigray genocide, the nuances and the depth and the gravity of what's been happening in Tigray and to Tigrayans throughout the region runs very deep, but I'm going to do my best to summarize it as briefly as I can. So when considering Tigray, it's crucial to recognize the contrast between Ethiopia's two governing visions. The multinational federalist model advocates for regional self-governance along ethno-linguistic lines, similar to Canada's federal system. In contrast, the unitary model seeks centralized authority with local administration subordinate to the central government. These competing ideologies form the backdrop to the Tigray genocide. When Abiy Ahmed was appointed as prime minister in 2018, he sought to dismantle the pre-existing multinational federalist system that governed Ethiopia for the past 27 years and replace it with his unitary Prosperity Party vision. This did not sit well with Tigray's leadership, who completely rejected this decision. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, between 2018 and 2020, the dehumanization of Tigrayans had already begun when national broadcastings were referring to Tigrayans as cancers, weeds, and laughing hyenas. The culmination of the competing visions for Ethiopia, along with the isolation of Tigray in social and economic and political affairs, led to a military offensive labeled as a law and order operation on November 4th, 2020. This law and order operation, however, was used as a covert mission to inflict a horrific genocide on the people of Tigray and force them into submission. The military offensive was a collaborative effort between the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, the Eritrean Defense Forces, and the regional Amhara militia known as Fano. Social media was another frontier of the war, where the incitement of violence, the use of slurs, and gaslighting narratives were rampant on platforms like Facebook and X, which helped perpetuate and cover up the genocide. The telecommunications blackout imposed on Tigray, which lasted nearly 2 years, aimed to completely cut off Tigray from the world and prevented the world from hearing or seeing what was happening. The war was marred with mass atrocities, unwarranted mass arrests of Tigrayans, detainment in concentration camps, man-made famine, and the horrific use of conflict-related sexual violence. Women and girls were brutally attacked and told that a Tigrayan womb should never give birth, and soldiers were intentionally infecting Tigrayan women with HIV, as well as permanently scarring their reproductive organs using inanimate objects. The war against Tigray persisted until the signing of the cessation of hostilities agreement in Pretoria, South Africa, between the Ethiopian federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front on November 2nd, 2022. However, while the guns and bombings have stopped, we continue to witness the genocide take on a new form and simultaneously push aside the fundamental need for accountability in order to foster long-lasting peace. Today, exactly 2 years and 1 month since the signing of the agreement, the cessation of hostilities agreement has yet to be fully implemented. Around 40% of Tigrayan territories continue to be occupied by non-federal forces, specifically in western and northern Tigray, where the population continues to face oppression and violence. The indigenous Irop and Kunama minorities face heightened risks of extinction due to the ongoing occupation of northern Tigray by Eritrean forces, while close to 1 million IDPs cannot safely return home due to the ongoing occupation of western and northern Tigray. Between 60 to 70,000 Tigrayan refugees remain stuck in Sudan, where they are especially vulnerable due to the ongoing war in Sudan. The genocide also continues by means of attrition, where the federal government postures itself as a peacemaking entity to its international donors, while, for example, intentionally skewing humanitarian data to downplay humanitarian needs in Tigray, as found by the Interagency for Humanitarian Evaluation. Canadian mining also further complicates the situation on the ground in Tigray. as it seems that it's all business as usual for Ethiopia's partners, while Tigray remains vulnerable and left alone to pick up the pieces. If you'd like to know more and want to support our advocacy to bring justice to the victims in Tigray, please check out omnatigray.org and follow them on all social media platforms. You can also fill out their petition, which only takes about 1 minute to do and will automatically send the petition to your designated member of parliament. Also, follow AGVC on all platforms to stay engaged and informed on upcoming events and initiatives that aim to support the mission of genocide victim communities in Canada. You can also follow me on Twitter, where you can easily find the Omna Tigray petition on my page. I will link all mentioned sources in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda. That's a great presentation, and I'm very sorry for the brief interruption. Roy, who is here for the Tamil community, who I believe will be speaking shortly, just called me to tell me that we're live now. We are live on YouTube, also on a Tamil channel that he is affiliated with. So, thank you, and apologies for that. I think next is Roy. Roy, are you here in the room? If
yes,
not,
I'm here. Can somebody else take? Then I'll come in.
We will skip Roy for a moment. Just double check.
Not sure he is.
No, he's not. Okay. How about Sharab?
Yeah, I'm here. Let Sharab do it, please.
Okay.
After that, I'll come in. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. I can introduce Sharab. Sharab is the executive director of the Canada-Tibet Committee, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for the rights and freedoms of the Tibetan people. Sharab has a background in empowering Indigenous women in Nepal and overseeing education and healthcare projects in Tibetan refugee communities in India. He holds academic degrees in business management and business administration from universities in India and Canada. His leadership at the Canada-Tibet Committee demonstrates a strong emphasis on engaging with policymakers, civil society, and the public to advance the cause of Tibet, contributing to a more informed and supportive global community for the Tibetan people. This past June, the Parliament of Canada passed a unanimous motion in the House of Commons calling for Tibet's right to self-determination, and the motion refers to Tibetans as people and a nation, which is a significant development. So congratulations and thank you. Welcome, Sharab.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, James. And thank you, MP LESLC, for your continued support to Tibet and other human rights issues. So I'll start with talking about China's CCP's main goal, which is the rejuvenation of Chinese nation. The CCP's vision of national rejuvenation is tied to the erasure of those who they think do not fit into its narrow, Han-centric definition of the Chinese nation. And this vision seeks to assimilate ethnic minorities from the occupied nations, such as Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Mongolians, into this singular homogeneous Chinese identity. For Tibetans, this means the systematic destruction of our language, culture, and religion. The campaign of Sinicization in Tibet, because of this policy, is accelerating at an alarming pace, with over 1 million Tibetan children forcibly placed in residential schools, which you may have heard in the last few years, separated from their families, stripped of their cultural heritage. This is certainly not an education. It is a cultural genocide for us. Since the Chinese invasion of Tibet in the 1950s, Tibetans have faced severe state repression, including violent crackdowns, mass surveillance, restrictions on religious practices, and arrest even for the slightest dissent. These measures have been intense in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, as China has broken down and integrated the historical Tibet into several provinces, into what they call Tibet Autonomous Region, but also to the other Tibetan regions that are now integrated into the province of Sichuan, Qinghai, Yunnan, and Gansu, which makes up for almost 50% of the original Tibet. One of the more recent concerning developments is the mass DNA collection program launched by the Chinese authorities in 2016. It was reported by University of Toronto-based Citizen Lab last year, I think, between June 2016 and July 2022. An estimated of 919,000 to 1.2 million DNA samples were collected from Tibetans, including men, women, and children, without any criminal investigation. This surveillance program is a clear attempt to exert social control over Tibetans, furthering the CCP's repression of Tibetan population. Additionally, forced migration has also become a key component of CCP's strategy in Tibet. Since 2016, the Chinese government has rapidly accelerated the relocation of Tibetans under the pretext of improving livelihoods and protecting the environment. Those relocation often happens without any compensation or consultation. Human Rights Watch have reported that these relocations are far from being voluntary, as claimed by the Chinese government. The government employs coercive tactics such as repeated home visits, threats of punishment, and cutting essential services to force Tibetans into agreeing to this move. These relocation programs have resulted into the forced relocation of over 930,000 Tibetans, with many struggling to find sustainable work and becoming disconnected from their traditional livelihood and culture. This displacement contributes to the broader strategy of cultural genocide, further eroding our Tibetan identity. Similarly, Tibetans are subjected to forced labor in military-style camps under the guise of what they call the vocational training. Around 500,000 Tibetan farmers and nomads have been forced into these camps, where they face intrusive surveillance and ideological indoctrination. The Chinese government claims participation, again, as they claim, is voluntary, but evidences of forced relocation and eviction strongly suggest otherwise. These policies, such as the 2019-2020 Farmer and Pastoralist Training and Labor Transport Action Plan, serve not only to impoverish Tibetans, but also to further assimilate them into the Han Chinese culture by severing their connection to the traditional ways of life. At the same time, Tibet's rich natural resources, including vast lithium reserves, are being exploited to fuel China's green energy ambitions, primarily through electric vehicles. The exploitation of these resources, while touted as part of China's transition to renewable energy, comes at a very high environmental and social cost. Lithium mining in Tibet is an energy-intensive process that threatens the Tibet's ecosystem, fragile ecosystem, I must say, that sits at an average altitude of 4,500 meters and has already caused environmental damage, such as river poisoning. It is estimated that Tibetan Plateau holds around 85% of China's total lithium, around 3.6 million tons of lithium out of the 4 million total million tons of lithium deposits in entire PRC. Tibetans who protest against these mining operations face brutal repression, including imprisonment, torture, and even death. The irony is that the very lithium extracted from Tibet is used to power the surveillance system that monitor and control Tibetans, further intensifying the authoritarian grip of CCP. The CCP's approach to ethnic minorities in Tibet is rooted in policies of sinicization and forced assimilation. Under the Ethnic National Unity Law, which the CCP has mandated the assimilation of groups into dominant Han Chinese culture, as I mentioned earlier, promoting what they say as a kind of a long-held, party goal, right from Deng Xiaoping to Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao and now to Xi Jinping. So what we see right now, as part of overall repression, is not limited to one person, one leader, as Xi Jinping. It's rooted in its party's ideology. this drive for unity through assimilation is reflected in the closure of Tibetan and Uyghur schools, suppression of our religious practices, and the forced integration into Han-dominated state structure. The rise of Zhongma Mingzu, a concept that's kind of subsumes the other minorities into a singular Chinese ethnicity, seeks to erase the cultural distinction of Tibetans and Uyghurs and other nationals in PRC, which further consolidates CCP's overall control over peoples living there. So I'll end my note here by saying that it's the same party that is responsible for some of the most horrific and some of the most devastating human tragedies in modern history. During the Great Leap Forward, which happened between 1958 to 62, the CCP's disastrous policy led to deaths of estimated from 30 to 45 million people through starvation, forced labor, and repression, making it one of the deadliest famines in human history. In Cultural Revolution, which happened from 1966 to 1976, another 1.5 to 2 million people were killed. Countless others were tortured, humiliated, driven to suicide as the party sought to eradicate dissent and reshape the society through its ideological vision. The staggering death tolls highlight one truth, which is that the survival of CCP and its political ideology has always taken precedence over the lives and well-being of its own citizens. Any other political party and in any other country would have collapsed under such catastrophic failures. But CCP has not only survived, it has continued to consolidate its power by suppressing accountability, rewriting history, and silencing dissent. And now, as it aims to become a global leader through its strategy of what they call creating community of common destiny, there is an unprecedented risk of its leadership model being exported and followed in many other countries. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sharap, for that, the history, the context, and the warning coming from Tibet. And appreciate that. James, I think Roy is next. Roy, are you here?
Yeah, can you see me?
I cannot see you personally.
What's wrong with this?
We can go with Pascal if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
Okay, no worries. We'll figure that out.
Would you like me to introduce Pascal?
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Joanne. My name is Pascal.
James, we have an introduction for Pascal, we have an introduction for you that James.
Sorry.
Yes.
I mean, you can go ahead, but we can introduce you as well.
Okay, go ahead. Take your time.
Pascal Kanyemera, I think I've just pronounced that, probably butchered that, but he's a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan genocide against the Tutsis and a passionate advocate for remembrance, resilience and reconciliation. As the president of the Humura Association, a Canadian non-profit founded by survivors, Kanyemera has dedicated his life to supporting fellow genocide survivors and preserving the memory of a dark chapter in human history. Under his leadership, the organisation fosters healing and empowers the survivor community through advocacy, education and solidarity. Welcome, Pascal. I'll pass the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, James. Like you said, my name is Pascal Kanyemera. You did pronounce it right. And I'm joining you from here in Ottawa, the National Capital Region, where our organization, Humura Association, is located. Our members are mainly the survivors of the 1994 Tutsi genocide in Rwanda, and our organization has been around since 2001. And we have close to probably 1,500. We don't have, because we have newcomers in the city and the people who live in the town, so you have close to 2,000 members here in our region. And like you said, our organization not only commemorate this genocide, especially in the month of April. But also we help our members who are hugely suffering from mental health by connecting them to professionals locally and helping them to recover and to treat their mental health. And I'm coming here not to talk the historic perspective of the genocide of the Tutsis, and I'm here to talk about the impunity. After the genocide in 1994, you have so many survivors who came to Canada, but also you have so many perpetrators who found refuge in Canada. While Canada tried to bring the justice to those people, since 1994, we had only 2 condemnations in Canada. And I don't know if you all remember the case of Lewo Mugesera and the Munyanes in Toronto. Mugesera was extracted from Canada, and the Munyanes right now is serving his life sentence in prison in Canada for his involvement in genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. I'm probably going to to talk about my personal connection with this impunity in Canada. You have so many people who committed genocide who came to Canada, and they didn't come to Canada by declaring their names, by giving the right identity in Canada. Rwanda is a small country, and when the genocide ended, you have so many people who committed genocide who went to neighboring countries. Congo, Burundi, Tanzania, and all the Central Africa and Southern Africa. And as you all know, it's probably easy in Africa to get a new identity. So you have all those people who went to those refugee camps. And when Canada went to those refugee camps to get people who could settle in Canada, they didn't have the tools to know the people who committed genocide or the people who didn't commit genocide. So you have so many people they brought to Canada without knowing their past history in Rwanda. And I can give you an example of the person who killed my own cousin. My aunt saw him in the Montreal subway back in the 2000s, and she was shocked to see that guy who killed our cousin in Rwanda. But unfortunately, she couldn't do anything because he saw him and then he disappeared. But because we gave their names to the police, but they couldn't find the person because he probably changed his name when he came to Canada. And as we speak right now, we contact our embassy in Canada, and apparently there is cross between 200 and 250 well-known genocidaires who are residing in Canada. But the government of Canada, either because of the cost that may be related to persecuting those genocidaires, or there's probably not willing from the government to persecute those genocidaires. But as a community, we are powerless because, as you know, it involves a lot of money, and the political willingness from the government of Canada is not there to persecute those genocidaires. And 2 years ago, one RCMP officer went to Rwanda to investigate those people that we know are here in Canada. But unfortunately, there's no follow-up. There's nothing is being done to persecute those Jews in Canada. And as a community, we have to keep advocating. We have to keep pushing from Canada, and so those people who committed genocide can be brought to justice. And as a collectiveness, and I think you all have yes, the victims of the genocide here in Canada, but as communities also who are here, you also have people who committed those genocide who are residing in Canada. And as a collective group, I think we should keep pushing the government of Canada to not only give justice to the victims and also to give a sign to the whole community that Canada shouldn't be a safe haven for the people who commit genocide around the world. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Pascal. It's a great call again to action for all of us. we're going to finish off this section of community representatives with Roy. Roy, it's great to see you. Roy Wignaraja is the former Minister for Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities for the Transnational Government of Tamil Eelam. He's the former journalist and editor of the Ceylon Times and a current member of the Global Tamil Council. He advocates on behalf of the Tamil community here at home in Canada and in various contexts around the world, including at the Human Rights Council. So welcome, Roy.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you
Uh-oh.
for coming in.
I can't hear you. Can others hear you?
Can you guys hear me?
There is a problem, we can't.
Can you hear me?
Joanne, may I take a moment just whilst we wait for Roy to just say a few words as take my privilege and say a few words, if I may. Yeah, I just wanted to say that the situation again with Sri Lanka is the same as we've heard throughout. But the after the financial crisis in Sri Lanka and the collapse of basically Sri Lanka's economic system, the atrocities that have been committed both historically and since then have been utterly horrific. And there is no meaningful truth, justice, and reconciliation a method or system in place to try and help victims of these crimes. As we've heard from everybody in this talk today, all communities are longing for justice with no concrete steps as to where to get that. And we've heard some really harrowing testimonies from people today. As I said at the start, and one thing I just want to say, Mr. Asasi is still in the room, is that we all, both in living in Canada as we are in the UK, in Commonwealth jurisdictions, we have parliamentary assemblies and we have the ability to ask representatives questions and to get them to question those in charge. So I would implore anybody who's in this webinar to get in touch with your MPs across Canada and to pose questions and to try and get questions answered from the government and from those in charge that can change things, and also to speak to your communities about how to work together cohesively across the world with different groups, as we're all fighting for the same thing here. But I just wanted to say that, and also not to get disheartened with the things that we're hearing today from all groups who are fighting for justice, and we're all in the same boat, I think, here. Whether you're an advocate for a community, whether you're a genocide survivor, or whether you're an elected official.
Yes. Can you hear me now, Joanne?
Yes, we can hear you. All right, great.
All right. Thank you, MP James, and the rest of the participants here, and thank you, Joanne. Well, I was listening to most of the presentations here, and it's all the same. We are all interconnected in one way or other, like MP James just mentioned. So Sri Lanka's issue, as the Parliament would have heard so far over the past several years, started from 1948, and the genocide in Sri Lanka fulfills all the 5 elements of the convention, and it was structural till about 1983, since 1948. Then it blew up into a full-scale war when the war was brought to an end with the help of the international community. That's when the physical genocide in a mass number, in a big magnitude, took place, where more than, according to the UN, it's 70,000, but there was a bishop of a certain area who compiled the numbers, and he brought it to like 146,676 or something that perished within within a span of 2 to 3 months. Now, the Tamils have been asking for justice not only from Canada, from most of these Western countries. The sad part here is at the United Nations Human Rights Council, there's something called the core group on Sri Lanka, and Canada is part of that. Well, I do appreciate as a Tamil advocate, that Canada has taken certain steps, but from the bigger perspective, I don't think it's enough. Just to mention a couple, I would say in 2023, January 10th, Canada sanctioned the two former presidents, both are brothers, and a couple of military officials. And then this year, on the 20th of November, MP Sean presented a petition in Parliament which urged the government of Canada to take Sri Lanka to the ICJ. Now, I do understand there are technicalities in taking a country to the ICJ and also taking officials to the ICC of a country. So, but however the case may be, justice need to be delivered, and Canada can voice out more and more and try to take actions. Now, in the present situation, the government in Sri Lanka has changed, and it's a leftist government. They were once the people in the government, the president included, was banned at one time back in the 90s or late 80s, 87 to 89. It was banned as a terrorist organization. Of course, their cadres, they lost about 60,000 cadres within 2 years. The government of Sri Lanka just massacred them. Now, they have come to power, but they do not want to recognize the right to self-determination of the Tamils. They're trying to, their current slogan is, we are all one people, there's no ethnic issues, it's just economic, right? If we solve the economic issues, then there won't be any issues in this country, which is not true, but that's the route they're taking to lure the international community and make them feel that is the reality there. But the reality is the Tamils are a nation historically. We ruled our own land, and when the Europeans arrived in 1505, the country had 3 different kingdoms, and one was the Tamil kingdom. Now, having said that, the Tamils, we have our inherent right to self-determination, and we have the right to decide what we want. The Tamils don't say, okay, now go separate the state. They are not saying that. But they want our legitimate rights and aspirations recognized. So in that journey, we have all these tools like the genocide that was committed against us, the human rights abuses, and so on. There's scores of evidence that have been collected. In the UN itself, there's more than 120,000 pieces of evidence which they have already spelled out in the UNHRC. And the very recent submission that was made to various countries by Yasmin Suka, a former UN official. She is the head of an organization called International Truth and Justice Project. On December the 5th, they put out a report calling for sanctions for more than 60 plus Sri Lankan officials under, for human rights abuses and various other things. So at the present context or the present situation, I would urge the government of Canada not to be taken by the rosy pictures given by the government of Sri Lanka. Well, we have to cooperate when it comes to economic issues, but the reality is the government of Sri Lanka has to recognize the Tamils' right to self-determination and be willing to talk to the Tamils with international mediation as to how to settle this issue, right? Till then, and at the same time, they also have to admit to the fact that there was genocide committed against the Tamils, and that needs to be recognized and some sort of a justice be delivered to the victims. So this is what at the present time I could ask the government of Canada to do, and the government of Sri Lanka's assimilation tactics are not going to work. So the government of Canada with the core group members will have to be strong enough to tell the government of Sri Lanka that there are certain things that the government of Sri Lanka needs to accept as fundamental facts, which is the commission of genocide against the Tamils, the right to self-determination of the Tamils, and at the very minimum as a solution, a federal solution such as a federal system such as we have in Canada to be given to the Tamil areas so that we all can work together, live together in peace. If not, again, it's going to end up very ugly. I don't know when. It could be 15 years from now or 50 years from now or even 100 years from now. But we don't want to see that. Things have to be brought to an end. So the government of Canada, I think, has a big role to play. And in the diaspora, Canada is home for the largest Tamil diaspora. So, and we have been working for Canada, we have been paying taxes, we have been contributing towards the betterment or the betterment of the economy of Canada in various fields and in various forms and shapes. So I think Canada is also obligated, and that's the request on this day I could give the government of Canada to consider, not only to consider but also to act upon it and to sanction anyone that needs to be sanctioned further, because any government or the governments that were up to that were in Sri Lanka up to the 14th of November this year, nobody wanted their officials to be taken to an international justice mechanism such as ICJ or such as ICC. The present government has the same policy, so they don't want to let their people go to the docks. But if they don't want to do that, at least they have to admit it, and that admission has to be public. And Canada, I think, can do a lot of work on that, and Canada can, definitely get them to do it along with the core group members. And I'll finish it off at this. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Roy. Wow, we've heard a lot in the last few minutes from all of these communities. We only have, we're running a little over time, and we have maybe 10 minutes for questions and answers. And I know there are a number that have come up on the chat already, and then we have a hand here. But others also, if you do have questions, we will try to get to as many as we can in the next few minutes. Let's just see if we can find, I'm going to go back and see if I can find the very first one. I think the very first. Do you have it, James?
First one I've got is where are we? It's from Hi, which is how come Taliban has so much power, why it expands so quickly, and why that's happening even in Southeast Asian countries. I suppose what Hi's getting at with that question is how the ways of the Taliban has come to power so quickly. With the fall of Kabul in 2021, and how quickly that takeover happened, and how they've able to get such a hold on Afghanistan in that time period. So that's a great question. I think if he's here, then
Sharon, are you able to speak?
If not, I can speak to that question.
Perhaps James, if you want to start, and we'll see if Dr. Sharon comes back. We'll love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think just to speak on that question specifically, I think that the Southeast Caucasus or that region in general has been at the hands of exploitative forces such as China, such as the West, particularly US, Canada, UK, or US and UK, particularly from the West, in terms of its minerals, in terms of its oil, in terms of natural gas, in terms of those resources. It's been able to be exploited so much to the point where it's become sort of a pariah state, and Afghanistan's been left in the hands of such forces such as China, who has a massive hold over Afghanistan's resources. And this has allowed for different groups to sort of exploit, such as the Taliban, but has also meant that Afghanistan's quite a fractured country in terms of the very diverse tapestry of ethnicities and different identities in Afghanistan. And there's no cohesive voice, or there's very little cohesive voice. And after years of pillage by these different regimes and by foreign forces and foreign actors, it's left it very, very vulnerable to exploitation. And I think that sort of that narrative has meant that the Taliban has been able to expand its power and been able to conglomerate over its power and been able to exploit other actors within the region. And I think as pertains to Southeast Asia, that goes to that exact point. It's a mineral-rich country, which means that lots of countries want to take from it. And the Taliban have allowed that to happen, but in exchange for arms, or in exchange for power, and in exchange for the massive power grab it's had over the region. But I'll leave that there.
Wait, there's another question here that's also on the Hazara genocide, and I'm wondering if Dr. Sharan is not available at the moment. Perhaps we'll go with Abbas first. I'm not sure what your question is on, but Abbas Basir, if you'd like to ask your question. Ready for you.
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak. So I'm from Afghanistan and from Hazara communities. I'm delighted to be here and hearing presentations from different perspectives and from different countries, the communities, and also would like to thank Dr. Tahir Sharan for his very excellent presentations. I don't want to add something about that. Just I want to say that we, with Dr. Sharan and some other dignitaries of Hazara community, are working with different governments, different parliament from different countries to enhance political advocacy for the Hazara genocide. This is very important. So we are working with New Zealand Parliament members, with Australian Parliament members, and also with UK. There are groups of parliaments so advocating for this, and we are going to expand this network. So my question is that would you be ready to join this process, this network, or not? If it's possible, it's better to work with this, because if there is no political advocacy and we don't have a strong voice at the world level, it would be difficult to have support, technical support, or legal support for the prevention of genocide in these countries, particularly in Afghanistan. So I'd like to invite you to join this network also, because we're having meeting with MPs, and Richard Bennett is there, and some other dignitaries from different countries are there. So thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. That's a wonderful. I'm honored for the invitation on behalf of the Alliance of Genocide Victim Communities. That definitely, and I think that something we have been talking about is global. More strategies around global pressure. So far, since the Alliance was formed, we have primarily looked at how we can move Canada to address our specific situations. But I think that that's something that we could all take as a consideration. And I would love to, perhaps we can meet with you and Dr. Sharan at some point and discuss how that could be a possibility in the future. So thank you for that and for the work that you're doing. Sounds important. And Dr. Sharan, you're back. That's great. Welcome back.
Sorry, 1 minute. I had something comes up, I had to leave.
No.
Is there anything, was there addressing me or?
Yes, there's another question here in the chat, which was around, the best type of action to prevent the Hazara genocide, and how can our voices be heard by international community and human rights organizations? What is the earliest thing that could, what was the question? The earliest things that could, where we could detect a genocide? Are there ways we can, I guess, detect genocide earlier? But in particular with the Hazara genocide, what can be done to prevent this currently?
I think there are many actions we can take. First of all, what is really important in terms of, awareness. This is something I think we're having a lot of difficulty to, pass our message across, big spectrum of politicians and human rights activists, and then, in particular decision makers. And I think this is something very important to see how we can actually echo our voice stronger, that the people, at least the decision maker, they actually first of all recognize what is going on in Hazara is Israeli genocide, and then they acknowledge their atrocities. And I think wherever people are, my advice would be it's good to be in contact with their MPs. If you are in UK, for example, James, in here we have the Hazara All Parliamentary Group. Over the last 10 years it was on and off, but luckily now it's on again with the hard work of James and his colleague there. So I think being in contact with those kind of parliamentary group is very important. In Canada, for example, we've been trying to be in contact with politicians, in particular parliament, as much as possible, and trying to update them by what is going on currently in Afghanistan against the Hazara community. And I think this is very important, that the community as a whole, and then the other human rights activists, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Hazara community and advocate for them. But one of the big challenge for the victims community, because we have many of them in this group, is the people within the country. Usually they try to, the people either have a connection with the perpetrators, or the part of the same ethnic religious group. They are actually one of the main barrier for recognizing the certain genocide. And a lot of time, even there is a advocacy against the victims, to try that their voice not to be heard. And I think this is something very important, in particular for the politicians, to pay attention to the things more carefully, because especially if you are marginalized group, victims, usually you don't have the kind of platform as a perpetrators. Usually perpetrators has got stronger national, international platform to reach and then fabricate of what they are saying again against the victims. And I think this is something very, very important that we have to consider, that there is, in terms of advocacy, although we are trying to work hard that the atrocity be recognized, that justice come forward, but there are a lot of abstract, and particularly among the people who have some connection with the perpetrators, and they have a stronger platform, as I mentioned. And this is also something is important we have to address. And to make things short, we have to use all the medium we have, from advocating with the human rights community, organization, human rights activists you have in your cities, in your countries. If you have a connection with the politician, try to keep right to your MPs regularly, update them. This is kind of a small thing we can do, but I'm sure in the long term that will actually pay off. And at some stage, the decision makers and then the public will know about it and recognize the atrocity, and then probably somehow we could find a way to prevent it further. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think there's a lot of advice there that applies to all the communities, so the perfect way to wrap that up. And I think maybe we'll take this last question from Kidane, and then we'll move on to our last section.
Yeah, can I just say one thing, which is that there's loads and loads of questions, and there's some questions that come direct to me, which is about how we look at the bigger question of how to prevent genocide. And I think what we'll do is we'll try and put these into a brief, but we can carry on this dialogue and we can carry on these conversations. And I think it's really good to have these questions. But yeah, lots of questions, not much time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kidane Gavramaya. I'm from the Tigrayan community. First of all, I just would like to thank for the alliance with the leadership of Joan and other members for organizing this very important event. Yeah, and I also want to thank to the presenters. What I noticed is there is a common problems across the board, which we really, that's why this alliance is formed. And I like to borrow the word from Dr. Sharon that he said that we cannot do it alone. And I agree, I absolutely agree that the Tigrayan community cannot do it alone. The Tigrayan community has, by the way, I also particularly want to thank to Magdan, for her a wonderful presentation, amazing presentation. So, the Tigrayan community, or the genocidal war in Tigray, has caused, the loss of more than 1 million people, more than 220,000 girls and women, and and the displacement of thousands of displacements to the neighboring countries and so on. While all this unprecedented genocidal war is being committed, the media, the mainstream media, has been silent. And my question is, what do we do, to ask or to promote or maybe to persuade the media? Because next to the politicians, the media, the world is ruled by the media, especially by the mainstream media. So what do we do, to convey the message to the media so that the media can cover it? And that's my question. Thank you. So anyone,
Good question. I feel like it is something that so many of our communities struggle with. So I wonder if anybody has any thoughts.
Probably people on media, journalists, they have a better idea. I think one thing is very important: if we can actually work on a strategy, in particular the victims community, that how we can actually have a better outreach to the media. And in particular, it's very important, based on that kind of a strategy, we see how we can actually effectively work toward passing our message across. As you know, the media is looking for something that is more interesting and then people read it. But now how we can make our story more relevant, this is the questions. And I think I'm not expert, but I think at least probably one thing is very important: we should have expertise in this area, that then they could actually advise us on how we can actually do a better outreach to the media. And I think one way is just telling our story. And I think I like when I was in one of this event with a few months ago with Joanna, with one of our victims community. One thing I found very interesting is writing a story about what happened. A lot of time the victims, they forgot to write about themselves because they get used to it. They think the story they know is something, is just a story. And I think it's very important we encourage our community to keep writing, recording everything. And I think every community, if you have a one book of human rights every year, in this book, just you have to, document it, whatever incident they are facing, and writing and publishing. And I think that is going to be a strong kind of, documents that it's going to help us for advocacy as well, if you have such a thing. And I think if the community is willing to do so, but I know it's a challenging. A lot of member of community is not finding so interesting, or there is a barrier for them to actually participate and write their story, what they actually face as a victims. But we have to work harder and encourage them to do so. That might be helpful through that kind of activities. Even we can actually have a better outreach to media.
Thanks, Dr. Sharan. I think that, just before we move on to Sarah here in 1 second, my thought on this also, it's a similar experience that I think with the Tigrayan community, which I'm most familiar with. There was such a focus on policymakers and decision makers, and meeting with those who could potentially somehow influence or change policy towards Ethiopia and Tigray, that we didn't focus enough on the media. I mean, we did try, but I think that having a designated group of people that have that sort of concerted strategy could probably help a great deal.
Can I say something, Jen?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. It's in terms of the media, what I have been noticing it is either some mainstream medias, they don't want to take up the issue for various reasons. It could be political reasons or political intimidation or whatnot. And some other medias, even though they want to do it, they do not have the access to the victimized people. Then the next thing is, even if some are having access to the victims, then these big corporations that work along with certain governments and so on, they go and find a particular section of the victims, either give them some sort of a facility or money or something like that, and they make them to talk against what has happened to them, or for the major governments, or they are made to present the government's views or the genocide deniers' views. So this, when it comes to these medias, so far the only media that I have seen that has been doing something, even though they were established long before the 2003-2004 Iraq war, they came into prominence with the Iraq war, which is Al Jazeera, right? They are able to cover most of the issues around the world. But if you take CNN or APS or AFP or all these things, only a certain portion that, I'm sorry to say that, but it is a fact, only a certain portion that makes the Western world happy is being covered. As a result, a lot of victimized communities are being ignored, and the unfortunate fact is that, and they are unable to receive the justice they need, or receive the coverage they need on the right time. So as victimized communities, I think we have to come up with our own media structure, market it very well so that it reaches every nook and corner of the globe, so that our voices are heard, our everything we endure is being shown to the people, shown to the masses. Then things might change. Other than that, the media are also taking a side now. They are being biased. That's all I could say. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. So we'll move on to Sarah. So after all of this conversation around the many challenges that we face, Sarah is going to talk a bit about some of the shared ideas that we have for addressing these crises and problems. So Sarah teaches lawyer specializing in international criminal and human rights law. She advises various organizations, including Tamil Rights Group, the Association of Victims of Flight PS 752 Families, Secure Canada, and Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, helping them utilize domestic, foreign, and international mechanisms to seek justice and accountability for atrocity crimes and human rights abuses committed by state and non-state actors around the world. Sarah holds a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Toronto Faculty of Law and licenses to practice law in Ontario and New York. She has represented clients at all levels of court and has testified at numerous Houses of Parliaments, including the Canada House of Commons, the Australian Senate, and the UK House of Lords. She has received multiple recognitions and awards, including a commendation in 2016 from the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and the 2022 Honorable David Kilgore Global Humanitarian Leader of the Year Award. She was blacklisted by Russia in September 2022. Sarah is a senior fellow at...
Can I say something, Jim?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of the media, what I have been noticing is either some mainstream media, they don't want to take up the issue for various reasons. It could be political reasons or political intimidation or whatnot. And some other media, even though they want to do it, they do not have the access to the victimized people. Then the next thing is, even if some are having access to the victims, then these big corporations that work along with certain governments and so on, they go and find a particular section of the victims, either give them some sort of a facility or money or something like that, and they make them to talk against what has happened to them. Or for the major governments, or they are made to present the government's views, or the genocide deniers' views. So this, when it comes to these media, so far I have, the only media that I have seen that has been doing something, even though they were established long before the 2003-2004 Iraq war, they came into prominence with the Iraq war, which is Al Jazeera. Right? They are able to cover most of the issues around the world. But if you take CNN or APS or AFP or all these things, only a certain portion that, I'm sorry to say that, but it is a fact, only a certain portion that makes the Western world happy is being covered. As a result, a lot of victimized communities are being ignored, and the unfortunate fact is that, and they are unable to receive the justice they need, or receive the coverage they need on the right time. So, as victimized communities, I think we have to come up with our own media structure, market it very well, so that it reaches every nook and corner of the globe, so that our voices are heard, everything, the NDO is being shown to the people, shown to the masses, then things might change. Other than that, the media are also taking a side now. They are being biased. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. So we'll move on to Sarah. So after all of this conversation around the many challenges that we face, Sarah is going to talk a bit about some of the shared ideas that we have.
The tens of thousands of Tigrayan refugees stranded in Sudan should also be offered resettlement here. The Alliance of Genocide Victim Communities worked closely with MP Ali Assasi earlier this year on a parliamentary petition, which collected over 700 signatures in a month and requested that Canada do three things. One, place sanctions consistently on those responsible for gross violations of human rights. Two, conduct a thorough review of the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act to address any issues hindering the prosecution of international criminals. And three, provide resettlement opportunities in Canada for victims of genocide. So I'll just say a few words about each of these requests in turn and why they're important. So the first, as I mentioned, relates to sanctions. Canada has legislation that allows for the imposition of targeted sanctions on foreign officials or entities with responsibility for gross violations of human rights. Sanctions can include property blocking sanctions, so any property can be seized, and visa restrictions, so anyone in Canada could have their visas revoked and could be deemed inadmissible if they're not here as well. The Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, which is otherwise known as the Sergei Magnitsky Law, and the Special Economic Measures Act are the two more relevant pieces of legislation that are available for this purpose. The Sergei Magnitsky Law enables such sanctions on individuals, while the Special Economic Measures Act, SEMA, enables sanctions on individuals and/or entities. Beyond seizing and freezing assets of those sanctioned, Canada also now has an additional mechanism available to seek the repurposing of such assets. So this permits the government of Canada to sell off assets of sanctioned foreign officials and entities, and then use the proceeds to compensate victims. This was established by way of the Budget Implementation Act in 2022. This can be leveraged in Canada by the Canadian government applying to federal court to ask that any assets held by sanctioned officials and entities be repurposed, with the proceeds used to compensate victims, particularly genocide victims. Targeted sanctions have been employed by the Canadian government in response to a wide variety of gross human rights violations. As of July earlier this year, they had been employed against 753 individuals and 142 entities spanning at least 14 states. However, as I noted, the imposition of sanctions on individuals and entities responsible for gross human rights violations has not been applied consistently, particularly as it relates to violations committed against Hazaras, Tibetans, Tigrayans, and Tutsis. This should be remedied and sanctions should be applied consistently. The second request relates to Canada's Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act, which implements the principle of universal jurisdiction in Canada. This is the principle that there exists universal jurisdiction for atrocity crimes, that any country can prosecute individuals in their domestic legal systems for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, even when the atrocities occurred outside of the country. The exercise of universal jurisdiction and its requirements depends on the particulars of each country's domestic legislation, and in Canada, this is governed by the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. This act permits Canadian courts to prosecute individuals for these crimes that occurred outside of Canada, so long as the individual to be prosecuted is a Canadian citizen, resident, or visitor. So all that's required is physical presence in Canada. Despite this legal remedy existing on paper, however, it has essentially become defunct. The War Crimes Program has only ever prosecuted 2 people, both for their roles in the Rwandan genocide. The most recent prosecution concluded more than 10 years ago. The War Crime Program's mandate is to deny safe haven and end impunity for persons believed to have committed genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. To achieve this goal, the program is both empowered to deport international criminals so that Canada does not become a safe haven for them to evade justice, and to initiate criminal prosecutions. It is the Department of Justice War Crimes section within the broader Interagency Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes program that facilitates and funds criminal prosecutions. It is important that the program contain both capacities, deportation and prosecution, because they are each appropriate under particular circumstances. Where a person is suspected of having committed atrocity crimes and has fled to Canada in an attempt to evade justice back home, either deportation or extradition to face those criminal proceedings may be appropriate. On the other hand, there are some cases in which deportation would effectively represent impunity, and prosecution would be most appropriate. Consider a situation where the perpetrators are still in power. If a Chinese Communist Party official alleged to have involvement in the Uyghur or Tibetan genocides arrives in Canada, deporting that person back to China would effectively serve as a form of immunity. It is clear that the individual would be all but guaranteed to escape justice. Although the program formally has both deportation and prosecution capacities, it is focused almost exclusively on deporting international criminals as opposed to prosecuting them. Between 1997 and 2007, the program denied entry to over 3,700 individuals, and between 2009 and 2015, Canada removed 138 individuals for alleged involvement in atrocity crimes. According to the program's own evaluation report from 2016, Canada's ability to undertake further prosecutions is, quote, constrained by inadequate funding. This inability only harms victims, as the need for combating atrocity crimes is only growing. This is why it is important that Canada conduct a thorough review of the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act and the program to address any issues hindering the prosecution of international criminals. Finally, the third request relates to refugee resettlement. Genocide often results in forcible displacements. This may be part and parcel of the genocide. For example, Human Rights Watch found that since November 2020, Ethiopian and Amharan forces forcibly displaced hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans, and that there were indications that the widespread forced displacements were carried out pursuant to a governmental policy aimed at changing the demographic nature of Western Tigray zone altogether. In response to this particular vulnerability of genocide victims, resettlements should be actively pursued, and this should be done consistently. Currently, Canada has worked to resettle some genocide victims, but not others. Yet most, if not all, genocide victim communities are in urgent need of this protection. Refugee resettlement of genocide victims can be accomplished practically in several ways. Presently, other than if a refugee sponsored by a constituent group of a sponsorship agreement holder, an asylum seeker needs a referral from a settlement agency like the UNHCR. This is a broader problem, as in many cases, asylum seekers in vulnerable positions cannot feasibly obtain UNHCR status. This requirement should be waived. Another simple and obvious reform is for Canada to expand the numerical cap that exists for sponsorship agreement holders, remove it, or declare that it no longer exists for particular groups. The current numerical cap on sponsorship agreement holders is another broad problem that merits reform, as it frustrates the generosity of Canadians and impacts genocide victim communities as well as other asylum seekers. Canada can and should fix the above problems to facilitate entry of refugees from genocide victim communities to Canada. Canada can also specifically create special or exceptional streams for refugees from genocide victim communities, as it has done for Uyghur, Afghani, and Ukrainian asylum seekers. All three requests are important. It is vital that Canada do what it can to address the atrocities that are still ongoing, to combat the impunity that persists for many past genocides, and to support and protect victims, especially those in unsafe third countries. This should serve not only to combat past and present genocides, but also to deter others going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Your work inspires such vital action in the fight against atrocity crimes and impunity, and for the protection of such vulnerable communities. So thank you for the presentation. And we have a couple of minutes perhaps for questions. If there are any from those here, I would lead off with one perhaps. And if there are any others that come up, we can address them. I had a question around when applying sanctions. Are there steps that Canada should take to ensure that sanctions against foreign nationals are enforced consistently and effectively? And how important is coordinating with other jurisdictions in other countries?
It's a great question. Interestingly, Canada has seemed to only impose sanctions when it's done in coordination with other countries. And certainly it would be more effective the more countries that are involved, because the more property would be seized, the more visas could be revoked or denied. But it's still the case that one is better than nothing. And this is the point we've tried to make with Global Affairs when they've expressed an unwillingness to impose sanctions that we've requested they impose. Even when another country isn't getting involved yet, there's still an argument to do it. And certainly enforcement is then a part of the battle. So if sanctions are imposed on a particular foreign national or entity, another impact of sanctions I didn't get into is that Canadians anywhere in the world everyone in Canada are prohibited from certain dealings with those on the list. So enforcing those prohibitions is important as well. And certainly, if that person applies to come into Canada, enforcement in the sense of actually denying them entry is important too. So all of those facets are part of reducing the impunity.
Can I just quickly come in there, Joanne, and just let's say, Sarah, that was an erudite analysis of the current situation in Canada, and I applaud that. So thank you so much for that. But I just wanted to say on that point, we know that international law is use cohesion norms, as we know, it's agreements between states, and it's a sort of non-binding in a way. And the issue with that is that enforcement is therefore truly hard, whether it be on sanctions reform, whether it be on sanctions by travel bans, asset bans, asset freezes, and that's one of the big hurdles to overcome. Now, one of the things that I would say can be done on that note is that you boycotting. We can boycott goods, we can boycott countries, whatever. On that note, but I think one thing I want to ask you on that point is, when it comes to sanctions, what can individuals do to make sure that the sanctions are sort of enforced in the name, but also how can they themselves take actions to sort of make sure that the sanctions are adhered to?
Yes, great question. I mean, certainly if Canadians, if there's someone on a sanctions list, even if the government of Canada isn't enforcing all of the prohibitions, Canadians should not be dealing with sanctioned officials. These are, individuals and entities where there's been evidence that they're involved, responsible for gross violations of human rights. So certainly avoiding dealing with those individuals and entities. And then, as you said, boycotting is always an option, the power of consumers. So, not purchasing products that, we know are reasonably likely to be made with Uyghur forced labor is something that, we've been advocating for a long time. So the use of boycotting is a useful tool. I would, caution, obviously, you want to do that selectively, just like sanctions should be targeted, as much as possible. So too should boycotts, but certainly all of those individual tools are powerful as well.
Anna, I see your hand up.
Thank you again. First of all, thank you to Sarah for your powerful presentation. And your presentation is very much appreciated. So the question that I would like to raise is, for the Tigray community, of course, for the other community as well, but for the Tigray community, the recognition of genocide is paramount, and it's our number one priority. Is there a precedent within Canada that Canada has recognized without the consultation of the American government or USA? It's just because we are really trying our best, but it doesn't seem it is clicking. So is it because they are Canada is waiting for other jurisdictions to recognize, or what is it? Thank you.
Great question. It comes down, unfortunately, to political will so much of the time. In terms of consultation, I'm not in the Canadian government. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I don't know if in past recognitions they consulted with the US or not, but certainly there's precedence for Canada, in terms of Canada has recognized other genocides. And Canada has recognized genocides in cases where, for example, the International Court of Justice hasn't made a finding of genocide yet. So that's sort of a common excuse. I don't know if Canada has made that as much as the UK, and James, maybe you want to speak on that, but I've heard this, before, more often than the, wanting to consult with the US, that, not wanting to recognize genocide until a court like the ICJ rules that something is genocide. But that's not a requirement under the law at all. So, a lot of it, yes, unfortunately, just comes down to political will.
Yeah, again, in the UK, it's exactly the same. I think that we're seeing it more and more now at the moment, especially here in the UK, but I know it's been seen in Canada as well, that we are unwilling, not unable, but unwilling to prevent and take actions to help the victim communities. And that's largely due to political affiliations with countries and with sort of a geopolitic of how we declare genocide. And the things that here, obviously, in the last couple of years, we've declared that we recognise the Yazidi genocide in Iraq. So I think these things can happen, and there's a couple of more genocide determinations that the UK has made. However, again, countries taking their own determinations is one step, but again, the United Nations needs to take more steps to recognise more genocides. But again, it's a political show. And all of these when we have the permanent five as we do, and the power of the veto, all of these things are very, very hard to do and hard to actually take action on the sort of on the wider level, and it ends up being left to communities in countries, in diaspora groups where they have a voice, to raise that voice, both with elected representatives and with advocates for human rights, and those that can take policy decisions and try and produce briefs that can then go to elected representatives that will create that change that people want to see. But on the point of the UK, again, a bit like Canada, we are very unwilling to declare genocide, crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing, maybe, but genocide is a word that nobody ever wants to go near. So yeah, that's the dismal end. I'll leave that on.
If I can add a note of hope to that. Yes, governments it's very difficult, but there are things that individuals can do, that civil society can do, that don't rely on government recognition. So, for example, Article 15 communications to the International Criminal Court, not available in every circumstance, obviously. The country needs to be a state party, or you need to creatively argue that some of the crime occurred on territories of states parties, but that's an option that doesn't necessarily rely on government. So, it's just one example, and I know we can't get into all of the possible remedies here right now, but there are things that don't require government involvement. So I'd encourage folks to take a little bit of heart there and emphasize that where government's unwilling to move.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think, we're a bit over time. I don't want to take too much more of everyone's time. But I so appreciate everything that everyone who's here and everyone who participated in this webinar today. As we acknowledge the challenges that we face in Canada, we want to propose actionable policies and outline steps, needed to create a stronger international human rights framework. So thank you, Sarah, again, for your insights. We're just about at the end of the webinar. One thing that came up this morning, and I thought if we have the opportunity to share it, we will. The Alliance of Genocide Victim Communities, of course, is always looking to add communities to our alliance. And if you know of victim survivor groups that, you can connect leadership to us, please let us know. This morning, we received a short video clip from a prominent advocate from the Rohingya community. It's about 2 minutes in length, and it is just a call for accountability and for justice. And this particular individual has just recently come to Canada, to Toronto, so I think we are hoping to connect with him and speak with him in the future. But we talked about it just briefly before starting this webinar and thought it could be something we could share. James, do you happen to have the video ready? And if not, I can quickly find it. I'm sorry.
Let me see whether I can get it up here.
We thought it would be a good opportunity to sort of just play it and amplify that call in solidarity. And we do hope that a representative of the Rohingya community will perhaps join the alliance in the coming weeks.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Can we see that?
Yep.
Genocide Prevention Day. I, Segul Karim, the founder and president of the Rohingya Justice Initiative, call upon international community and institutions to remind that it has been more than 7 years that the Rohingya minority people in northern Rakhine state of Myanmar endured genocidal attacks and other serious human rights violations against the population by the successive Myanmar military and other allies that forced nearly 1 million Rohingya people to flee into Bangladesh refugee camps. And despite many efforts to pursue justice for our survivors, it has been far due to bring perpetrators accountable and bring justice to our survivors. On this day, it's imperative to call on justice mechanisms and other international institutions to reshape its strategy to bridge pursuing justice to our survivors, and as IGI functions to document and investigate of the human rights violations took place against the Rohingya, to support the international justice mechanism, we call on international organizations to join RGI that strengthen the efforts of pursuing justice for our people, that offer a resolution to the Rohingya survivors and ensures non-repetition of the same human rights violations against the Rohingya back in Myanmar.
Okay, so thank you. We're keeping them in our thoughts today too. Thank you for spending this time with us and listening to survivors and thinking through possible strategies in response. Please feel free to reach out to the Alliance or any of the representatives that you heard speak today, or if you're watching this in the future, feel free to reach out to us. We're going to be sharing a recording of this webinar online. We'll distribute a report that will come from this webinar and the findings of it. And actually today, we also have a social media challenge. In lieu of a candlelight ceremony, on any social media platform, you can snap a picture of a candle outdoors and share why the day is important to you or who it is you're remembering. And if you use the hashtag Flames of Hope, we can find you on any platform. As a group and as many survivors, we would love to hear your thoughts. James, thank you for being here. Thank you for co-moderating. Thank you for your insights. And we're looking forward to continuing to partner with you in the future as well.
One last thing from me. These webinars don't exist in a vacuum. When you all go away and we go and carry on with our lives and all the banal stuff we have to carry on with, let's remember this conversation and let's continue to work towards a day where genocide is no more.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.